The morning sun gently shone over the quiet town as the 78-year-old Japanese woman slowly opened her eyes. Her room was small but cozy, filled with the memories of a long life. There were stacks of sheet music on the shelf, a few photographs of family members, and a worn-out piano that had been her faithful companion for decades. She took a deep breath and sat on the edge of her bed, feeling the familiar ache in her knees, a reminder of her age. But her heart was light, filled with the excitement of the day ahead. She had been invited to perform at a local piano showcase, a small event that gathered musicians from the area to share their talent. For many, it might seem ordinary, but for her, it was an important moment. She had spent countless years playing quietly at home, letting her fingers dance over the keys while imagining an audience that could hear the depth of her music. Today, she would finally play for real people, and though a part of her felt nervous, another part felt ready. She got out of bed and moved slowly towards the window. The morning air was crisp and cool, carrying the faint smell of flowers from the garden below. She looked at her reflection in the glass and smiled. Her hair had turned silver, and her face bore the lines of age, but her eyes still held a spark that spoke of curiosity, hope, and determination. She knew people might look at her and think that someone so old could not possibly play well, but she reminded herself that music had no age. It flowed through her as natural as breathing. Breakfast was simple. She made a cup of green tea and some rice with pickles, eating slowly and savoring each bite. Her hands trembled slightly, but they were steady enough for the moment. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. As a young girl, she had loved music, sneaking moments to practice on her family's piano whenever she could. Life had been busy with work, family, and responsibilities, and her piano had often been left in quiet corners, gathering dust. But the love for music never faded. Every evening, after finishing her chores, she would sit at the piano, letting her fingers remember the melodies she had learned as a child. She recalled the times when her family would listen to her play. Sometimes they would smile, sometimes they would nod politely, but it was never a performance for applause. It was simply her way of speaking, expressing joy, sadness, and everything in between. Over the years, she had developed a style uniquely her own, blending the classical pieces she loved with emotions she had gathered from a long life. The piano was not just an instrument. It was a companion, a storyteller, and a bridge to the world beyond her small home. Today, however, the audience would be different. There would be strangers, some young, some old, each with their own expectations. She wondered what they would think of her. Would they laugh? Would they take her seriously? The thought made her pause, a small flicker of doubt crossing her mind. But then she shook her head gently. She had come too far to worry about what others thought. Music was her voice, and today she would let it speak freely. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple but elegant outfit. Her hands lingered over the piano keys as she rehearsed silently in her mind. Each note, each pause, each emotion was carefully remembered. Though she had practiced countless times at home, the idea of performing in front of people made her heart beat faster. It was different, but she welcomed the challenge. She packed her sheet music and walked to the piano case, checking that everything was in order. Even at 78, she knew preparation was key. The day was clear, and the streets were beginning to fill with people heading to the showcase. She moved slowly but steadily, enjoying the morning air and the quiet anticipation that filled her. When she arrived at the hall, she was greeted by a buzz of activity. Young musicians were tuning their instruments, chatting with each other, and checking their programs. The energy was lively, almost overwhelming, but she remained calm. She had been in similar places before, performing at smaller community events, though never quite like this. The hall itself was bright and welcoming, with rows of chairs neatly arranged and a polished stage waiting for the performers. She took a deep breath and made her way to the piano, her heart fluttering in a familiar rhythm. As she approached the instrument, she noticed some of the audience already seated, whispering to each other. A few glanced at her and smiled politely, but others seemed surprised or skeptical. She could feel their eyes on her, noting her age, her quiet presence, and the simplicity of her appearance. Some of them probably thought she would not perform well, perhaps even doubted that she should be on stage. She felt a small pang of nervousness but quickly reminded herself why she was there. This was not about proving anyone wrong. It was about sharing the music she loved, the music that had been with her through every high and low of her life. She sat down at the piano, her hands resting gently on the keys. The hall grew quieter as the audience settled in, curious to see what this elderly woman could do. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the familiar feel of the keys guide her memory. Each key was a friend, each chord a conversation. She remembered her late husband, who had loved to hear her play in the evenings, and her children, who had grown up listening to her music filling their home. Those memories flowed through her fingers, bringing warmth and emotion to the moment. She opened her eyes and looked at the audience, not with fear but with quiet determination. She knew that some would doubt her, some might even laugh, but she was ready to play regardless. Her mind cleared, and all that remained was the music, waiting to be shared. The room seemed to hold its breath as she gently pressed the first key, feeling the vibration travel through her hands and into her heart. It was a small note, soft and deliberate, but it carried a lifetime of experience and emotion. The first sound echoed through the hall, a gentle introduction that invited the audience to listen closely. She allowed herself a small smile, knowing that the journey of this performance had begun. Every note she would play from this moment forward was not just music, but a story, a reflection of a life lived fully and passionately. She felt the rhythm of her own heartbeat align with the melody, each movement of her fingers a continuation of a story she had been telling for decades. Time seemed to slow as she began her performance. The audience leaned in slightly, some curious, others skeptical, but all attentive. She was not thinking about their judgment. She was thinking about the music, the sound, the feeling of the piano beneath her fingers. Every chord was deliberate, every pause meaningful. She played not to impress, but to connect, to let the music speak for her in a way words never could. The hall, once filled with casual whispers, grew silent as the notes floated through the air, each one carrying the depth of her experience and the purity of her intention. In that moment, the 78-year-old woman was not defined by her age, her appearance, or the doubts of others. She was defined by the music, by the passion she had nurtured all her life. Her heart was full, her mind focused, and her hands moved with a grace and precision that only years of dedication could bring. She knew that whatever happened next, she had already succeeded in sharing a piece of herself with the world. The journey had begun, and there was no turning back. The room was filled with quiet murmurs as the 78-year-old woman settled herself at the piano. She could feel the eyes of the audience upon her. Some were curious, some doubtful, and a few even whispered to their neighbors, exchanging glances that held a hint of amusement. She sensed it all but did not let it disturb her. She had learned long ago that the judgments of others did not define her. Music was her voice, and she intended to let it speak clearly, without hesitation. As she positioned her hands over the keys, a few young performers nearby smirked. They had been practicing their complex pieces for years and seemed surprised to see someone so old at the piano. Some whispered jokes under their breath, wondering if she would even manage to play a simple melody. A few members of the audience chuckled quietly, perhaps underestimating what she could do. She felt a flicker of nervousness but replaced it quickly with determination. Years of experience had taught her that true talent could never be hidden, even in the face of ridicule. Her first note was soft, almost tentative, yet precise. The sound seemed to linger in the air, capturing the attention of those who had been whispering moments before. Her fingers moved delicately, touching each key with care, and then she began to play more confidently. The initial laughter slowly faded as the melody grew richer, carrying emotion that words could not express. She allowed herself to close her eyes, letting the music guide her hands, connecting her memories, her joy, and even her sorrows into every note she played. People began to notice the change. The smirks disappeared, replaced by silent awe. The young performers who had laughed now leaned forward slightly, intrigued by the depth and beauty of her playing. Her fingers moved with elegance, and each chord spoke of years of dedication. The audience started to shift in their seats, drawn into the melody that seemed to float above them. Some held their breath, afraid to break the spell, while others exchanged astonished glances, unable to believe what they were hearing. The woman played with emotion that transcended her age. Every note seemed alive, telling a story of perseverance, passion, and love for the music. The murmurs of mockery that had filled the room earlier were gone, replaced by admiration and respect. The hall felt smaller, more intimate, as if her music had wrapped itself around everyone present, pulling them closer, sharing with them the essence of her soul. She had spent decades practicing alone in her room, imagining moments like this, and now she was living it. A few moments passed where the audience seemed completely absorbed, their doubts evaporating. She could feel the energy shift, the atmosphere turning from skepticism to wonder. Her fingers danced across the keys with precision and grace, weaving a melody that was at once simple and complex, comforting and stirring. It was a reflection of her life, every high and low, every joy and sorrow condensed into music that could be felt deeply. She did not need applause yet. The music itself was enough to convey her story. But even as the performance continued, she remained mindful of every detail. She balanced each note carefully, allowing the softer passages to whisper gently and the louder sections to resonate powerfully. Her eyes moved briefly to the judges, who were sitting quietly, their expressions changing as they listened. Skepticism was giving way to admiration, a recognition that talent could emerge at any age, and sometimes in the most unexpected forms. Even the young musicians who had doubted her now watched closely, learning silently that skill and emotion could never be measured by age alone. The audience was no longer a collection of strangers. They became participants in her story, feeling every note as though it were meant for them individually. She played pieces that were both familiar and original, blending classical melodies with subtle personal touches that revealed her unique voice. The hall seemed to vibrate with the music, and the woman, lost in the sound, allowed herself to feel free. There was no fear, no judgment, only the connection between her, the piano, and the listeners who were now fully engaged. Some members of the audience began to whisper again, but this time it was not mockery. Words like beautiful, talented, and incredible floated softly, unable to be contained. Cameras discreetly captured the moment, and the soft rustle of excitement replaced the earlier chuckles. She remained focused, continuing to play with a quiet intensity, each note carrying a part of her life story. She thought of the hours spent practicing alone, the nights filled with dreams of sharing her music, and the long journey that had brought her to this moment. Every second on that stage was a testament to her perseverance. The music flowed seamlessly, moving from gentle, tender passages to dramatic, powerful chords that seemed to fill the entire hall. Each transition was smooth, a reflection of decades of dedication and deep understanding of her instrument. She could feel the audience leaning in, drawn into the performance, their skepticism replaced by awe. Some faces glistened with tears, touched by the raw honesty and emotion of her playing. She had not intended to amaze anyone with technical skill alone. She had intended to share her heart, and it was clear that she had succeeded. As the performance continued, she noticed subtle changes in the audience's body language. The young musicians who had smirked earlier now watched intently, some even nodding slightly, acknowledging the brilliance of her playing. The older members of the audience sat forward, unable to take their eyes off the keys and the woman guiding them. Even the judges, who had initially raised eyebrows in doubt, were now leaning forward, captivated by the depth and clarity of her music. The initial mockery had vanished entirely, replaced by an atmosphere of admiration and respect. She allowed herself to smile slightly, a quiet acknowledgement of the transformation in the room. Music had the power to change perceptions, to turn doubt into wonder, and ridicule into appreciation. She played each note with intention, telling stories through the piano that words could never capture. Her hands moved gracefully, with experience guiding each motion, and the audience could feel the emotion behind every chord. She had spent a lifetime nurturing this talent, And now, in these moments, it shone brightly. The young performers, once confident and mocking, were now silent, some even holding their breath as she played. They could not ignore the skill, the emotion, and the dedication evident in every movement. Her age, once seen as a weakness, became a testament to her perseverance. The audience, too, was changed, seeing in her a reminder that talent and passion are not limited by time. They were witnesses to something extraordinary, a moment that would stay with them long after the performance ended. By the time she reached the final section of her piece, the hall was completely silent, the audience hanging on each note. She played with an intensity that was both controlled and deeply emotional, letting the music speak for her. Every chord resonated, filling the space with warmth, beauty, and the weight of a lifetime of experience. She felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that her music had reached the hearts of those listening, transforming initial mockery into admiration and wonder. The final note lingered in the air, a soft echo that seemed to hold the collective breath of the audience. She rested her hands gently on the keys, allowing the silence to speak as loudly as her music had. For a moment, there was stillness, as though the room itself was processing the beauty of what had just been shared. Then, slowly, the first claps began, hesitant at first, and then growing louder. The applause was genuine, heartfelt, and impossible to ignore. People rose to their feet, cheering and clapping, their previous doubts completely forgotten. The 78-year-old woman smiled softly, a quiet sense of triumph washing over her. She had faced skepticism, mockery, and doubt, yet she had stayed true to herself and her music. In that moment, she realized that age, appearances, and expectations could never define her abilities. Music was her truth, and it had been heard, appreciated, and celebrated. She bowed slightly to the audience, feeling gratitude for their recognition, but more importantly, for the opportunity to share her passion and touch hearts in a way that only music could. As she stood and stepped away from the piano, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. She knew that the performance would be remembered, not because of spectacle or fame, but because it had been honest, heartfelt, and real. She had transformed mockery into admiration, doubt into wonder, and silence into applause. In her heart, she knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one in which her talent would be acknowledged and celebrated far beyond the small hall where she had just performed. The morning had started quietly, filled with anticipation and doubt, but it ended with triumph, proving that passion, dedication, and courage could overcome even the harshest skepticism. The applause had barely settled when she took a deep breath and prepared for the next piece. She could feel the energy in the room, a mix of surprise, admiration, and curiosity. The initial doubts had vanished, replaced by anticipation. People leaned forward, waiting to see what this elderly woman could do next. She sat quietly, her hands hovering over the keys, feeling the familiar comfort of the piano beneath her fingers. Every note she played carried not just melody, but a lifetime of experiences, and now, she was ready to share more of that story. As she began the next piece, the audience was immediately drawn in. The music started softly, a gentle introduction that seemed to flow like a stream through the hall. Her fingers moved gracefully, each one deliberate, bringing out the subtle nuances of the melody. She played with emotion, letting the music tell her story without interruption. Some in the audience closed their eyes, feeling the depth of every note, while others exchanged looks of disbelief. How could someone of her age create such powerful music? The answer lay in decades of dedication, practice, and an unwavering love for the piano. The hall seemed to transform with each chord. The walls echoed with her sound, and the audience was transported beyond the small room into a world of beauty and emotion. She played with confidence, her previous performance giving her a quiet strength. The young performers who had once smirked now watched intently, realizing that talent was not measured by youth or appearance. Her music was teaching them a lesson in humility and respect, showing that mastery comes from patience, persistence, and heart. She allowed herself to remember the past while playing. Memories of her childhood lessons, the quiet evenings practicing in her room, and the times she had played for family and friends filled her mind. Each memory added depth to her performance, and her fingers translated these emotions into sound. She felt a connection with everyone listening, as if each note was a conversation, a message from her heart to theirs. The skepticism that had greeted her at the beginning had been replaced by genuine engagement, and she could feel it in the silence between the notes. The middle of her piece brought a shift in tone. The melody became more complex, weaving through highs and lows, building tension and release. Her hands moved with remarkable agility, surprising even herself at times. She was not focused on proving anything to anyone. She was immersed in the music. The audience sensed this authenticity, and their attention deepened. No one dared to make a sound, as if any interruption would break the spell she had created. The room was alive with the resonance of her piano, and everyone present felt it profoundly. Some members of the audience began to whisper softly, not in ridicule, but in admiration. Words like amazing, incredible, and unbelievable were spoken in hushed tones. Cameras and phones were discreetly raised, capturing moments that would soon circulate online. Social media would buzz with clips of her performance, and people everywhere would marvel at the talent that had been underestimated. She did not mind the attention. Her focus remained on the music, on sharing what she loved. The fact that others were noticing was a natural consequence of the sincerity of her performance. As the piece progressed, she introduced subtle variations, unexpected shifts in tempo, and delicate embellishments that added richness and character. The audience could sense the uniqueness of her style. This was not just technical proficiency. It was an expression of a life fully lived. Each note told a story of joy, sorrow, perseverance, and passion. The young musicians watched carefully, perhaps learning more in these few minutes than in years of training alone. She had transformed the piano into a storyteller, and the hall was captivated by her narrative. The more she played, the more her confidence grew. She had faced mockery and doubt, but now, the room was hers, held together by the resonance of her music. She felt a quiet joy in seeing the reactions around her. Faces softened, eyes widened, and people leaned closer, hanging on every note. It was a rare moment when age, experience, and passion converged to create something unforgettable. She smiled slightly, letting herself feel the connection with the audience, knowing that the skepticism had already been replaced with respect and wonder. She thought briefly about her life outside the piano. All the years spent in quiet practice, the moments of self-doubt, and the times she had doubted her own ability now seemed insignificant. This moment on the stage, with all eyes and ears focused on her, was a culmination of everything she had invested in her music. The recognition she received was not merely for skill, but for courage, persistence, and authenticity. She was living proof that talent and passion could shine at any age, regardless of initial judgments or societal expectations. The hall seemed to grow warmer, not in temperature, but in atmosphere. The audience was connected through the music, their emotions entwined with the story she was telling. She played with subtle dynamics, moving from soft, delicate passages to strong, commanding chords that echoed through the room. Each crescendo and decrescendo was intentional, guiding the listeners through peaks and valleys of emotion. The audience followed willingly, captivated by her mastery and the heartfelt performance. As the piece approached its climax, the energy in the room intensified. The audience could feel the tension building with each chord, the anticipation growing for the resolution of the melody. Her fingers flew across the keys with precision and emotion, each movement telling a story. The young musicians who had once mocked her now sat in awe, realizing that what they had dismissed at first was a lifetime of dedication distilled into an extraordinary performance. The hall, once filled with whispers of doubt, was now filled with silent reverence. She allowed herself a brief moment of reflection as she continued to play. Music had always been her companion, her refuge, and her voice. Today, it had become her bridge to the world beyond her small home. She could see the impact it had on those listening, and it filled her with a quiet pride and fulfillment. She played not for applause, not for recognition, but to share her heart. And in doing so, she had already succeeded in a way that words could never describe. The final chords approached, and she played with a sense of resolution and peace. The melody settled gently, leaving the audience suspended in a moment of awe. She held the last note, letting it resonate fully, then slowly released her hands. The silence that followed was almost tangible, as if the room itself was absorbing the beauty of what had just been shared. Then, gradually, the first sounds of applause began, soft and hesitant, and quickly grew into a wave of admiration and cheer. The audience rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, some with tears in their eyes. The transformation from doubt and mockery to awe and appreciation was complete. She smiled gently, bowing slightly in acknowledgement of their recognition. It was not the applause she sought, but it was a meaningful affirmation of her journey and her passion. She had faced skepticism, ridicule, and doubt, yet her talent had shone brightly, touching the hearts of everyone present. As she stepped away from the piano, she felt a sense of calm and fulfillment. She knew that her performance would be remembered not just for the music, but for the story it told. A story of resilience, passion, and the enduring power of following one's heart. The young musicians had learned a valuable lesson. The audience had experienced something unforgettable, and she had shared a piece of herself that could never be taken away. Her journey had transformed the room, leaving an impression that would linger long after the final note faded into memory. She took one last look at the piano, her faithful companion, and felt gratitude for the years spent together. It had been more than an instrument. It had been a friend, a confidant, and a voice for her soul. Today, it had helped her transform mockery into admiration and doubt into wonder. She stepped away from the stage, ready for whatever recognition or opportunity might come next, but knowing that the real reward had already been achieved. She had shared her heart, her story, and her music with the world, and in doing so, she had left a mark that would never be forgotten. After the applause had died down, the woman took a slow, steady breath. The energy in the hall had changed completely. What had begun as doubt and quiet laughter had transformed into admiration and amazement. She could feel it in the way people leaned forward, in the soft whispers of awe, and in the respectful silence that followed every note. She looked at the piano, her fingers hovering lightly above the keys. This was more than a performance now, it was a moment of connection, and she intended to make every second count. As she began her next piece, she let the music flow naturally from her heart. The notes rose and fell like gentle waves, carrying emotions that words could never capture. Each chord was deliberate, filled with care and intention. The audience, still captivated by her previous performance, listened in rapt attention. Even the young performers who had doubted her now watched silently, some with wide eyes, realizing that age did not limit talent or passion. The woman's hands moved with a grace and control that seemed effortless, but it was the result of decades of patient practice and unwavering dedication. The piece started softly, almost like a whisper, but it gradually grew in strength and complexity. She played with feeling, each note a reflection of her experiences, joys, and sorrows. Her music spoke of life lived fully, of challenges overcome, and of quiet moments of happiness. The audience could sense the authenticity in every sound. They were not just hearing a melody. They were experiencing the woman's story, told through the piano. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for each note, absorbing every emotion she conveyed. The young musicians nearby were particularly struck. They had entered the hall with confidence, some even smirking at her age, thinking she might falter. Now they were silent, captivated by her skill and the depth of her expression. It was a lesson they would never forget. That experience, passion, and dedication could produce something far beyond what youth and training alone could achieve. They watched her hands, noting the precision, the emotion, and the unique style she had developed over a lifetime. She continued to play, letting her fingers tell the story that had been waiting inside her for decades. The audience was drawn in completely, their skepticism gone. Even the people who had been quietly critical at the beginning were now leaning forward, eyes fixed on the piano and the woman guiding the melody. Her performance was not about showing off technical skill, though it was impressive. It was about sharing a piece of herself, a glimpse into her heart and soul. The music was alive, resonating with everyone in the room, and it created a sense of unity that was almost palpable. At one point, she closed her eyes, letting memories and emotions flow freely. She thought about her childhood, the early lessons, and the evenings she had spent practicing in solitude. She remembered the support of loved ones, the quiet encouragement, and the moments of doubt she had faced alone. All of these experiences shaped the music she played now. Each note was a reflection of her life, each chord a testament to the journey she had taken. The audience, sensing this, was captivated, some visibly moved to tears by the raw honesty and beauty of her performance. The complexity of the piece increased, with intricate passages that showcased not just skill but emotion. Her hands moved effortlessly over the keys, blending strength with delicacy. The melody rose and fell, carrying the listeners on a journey of emotions. There were moments of tension, where the audience felt their hearts race, and moments of softness, where they held their breath, immersed in the quiet beauty. She played with intention, each movement measured, but also flowing naturally, as if the piano itself were guiding her hands. The audience could feel the story she was telling. Every note carried a message, a feeling, or a memory. The atmosphere was electric, charged with emotion, yet there was also a sense of peace. People were completely absorbed, their eyes fixed on her hands and the piano, their hearts connected to the music. The young performers had stopped comparing themselves or judging her. Instead, they were learning silently, witnessing a master at work. It was a transformative experience, both for the listeners and for the musicians. The hall seemed to respond to her music. The notes echoed, filling every corner, wrapping the audience in a cocoon of sound and emotion. It was as if time had slowed, allowing everyone to fully experience each moment. She was not concerned with applause or recognition. She was immersed in the music, letting it flow naturally, and in doing so, she captured the hearts of everyone present. The skepticism and mockery that had greeted her had completely vanished, replaced by respect, admiration, and awe. As she played the middle section of her piece, the melody became more intricate and expressive. Her fingers danced over the keys with precision, yet each note carried warmth and humanity. The audience could sense the layers of emotion behind every sound. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, while others leaned forward, absorbed by the intensity and beauty. The young performers watched intently, taking in every detail, understanding that this was more than a demonstration of skill. It was a display of a lifetime of dedication and a deep love for the art. She allowed the piece to build naturally, creating tension and release that captivated the audience. Each passage was carefully considered, flowing seamlessly into the next. The highs were exhilarating, the lows tender and moving. She played not to impress, but to share, to convey the emotions that words could not express. The audience felt this sincerity, and it created a powerful connection. The room was alive with energy, yet it was calm and intimate, a shared experience that would stay with everyone for a long time. As she neared the final sections, she felt a sense of completion. The music had taken her and the audience on a journey, and she was ready to bring it to a close. Her fingers moved with confidence and purpose, each note carefully placed, each chord resonating with emotion. The audience, fully engaged, followed every movement, sensing the culmination of her performance. There was a collective breath held, a quiet anticipation, as everyone awaited the final notes that would end the story she had been telling. The last chords were soft yet powerful, echoing through the hall and lingering in the air. She held the final note, letting it resonate fully, and then slowly released her hands. The silence that followed was profound, a moment of reflection for both the audience and the performer. Then, gradually, applause began, growing louder and louder, until the hall was filled with cheers and clapping. People stood, some with tears in their eyes, acknowledging the depth, beauty, and emotion of her performance. The woman bowed gently, her heart full of gratitude and quiet pride. She had faced mockery, doubt, and skepticism, yet she had shared her music authentically and passionately. The audience had been transformed. Their perception shifted from disbelief to admiration. She had proven, without words, that age was not a limitation, and that true talent, nurtured over a lifetime, could captivate and inspire anyone willing to listen. As she stepped away from the piano, she felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond applause or recognition. She had connected with people through her music, and that connection was the true reward. As she walked off the stage, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. Decades of practice, moments of doubt, and years of quiet dedication had led to this moment of shared joy and admiration. She knew that the story of her performance would inspire others, showing that passion and persistence could overcome any obstacle. The young musicians who had doubted her now had a new understanding of what it meant to commit to an art form with heart and dedication. The audience had witnessed a transformation, a proof that talent could shine brightly at any age, and she had been the one to show them. The applause from the last piece had barely faded when she took a small pause, letting her fingers rest lightly on the piano keys. The hall was buzzing quietly with whispers and excitement. What had started as doubt, even mockery, had completely shifted to admiration. People were leaning forward in their seats, eyes fixed on her, curiosity and anticipation clear in their expressions. She felt the energy, but instead of feeling nervous, it filled her with calm determination. She had come here to share music, and now she could feel that her message was being heard. She began the next piece softly, her fingers moving with gentle confidence. The melody was calm at first, almost like a story being told in whispers. Then it began to grow, each note more assured, more expressive. The audience was drawn in immediately. There were no smirks, no quiet laughter, only eyes wide with wonder, and faces that reflected amazement. Even the young musicians who had been so confident earlier were now completely focused, quietly studying the way her hands moved, the way she expressed emotion through each chord. They had learned something invaluable. That true skill comes from patience, dedication, and a deep connection to what one loves. The woman closed her eyes as she played, letting her memories guide her hands. She remembered the long evenings spent practicing alone, the moments of doubt, the times she had wondered if all her effort was worth it. Each note she played now was infused with those memories, carrying decades of life experience, joy, sorrow, and hope. The audience was not merely listening, they were experiencing her life through the music. There was something human and universal in the way she expressed emotion, something that transcended age, culture, and expectation. As the piece progressed, the melody became more complex. There were intricate passages that required speed and precision, yet she played them effortlessly. Her hands moved with fluidity, her fingers dancing across the keys, yet each movement was full of purpose. The audience could see that this was not just skill. It was the result of years of love, commitment, and understanding of the instrument. Every note carried a story, every chord conveyed emotion. People leaned forward in their seats, holding their breath during the delicate moments, and sighing in awe when the music swelled. She felt the energy of the room in a tangible way. The audience was no longer passive observers. They were participants in her story, their emotions intertwined with hers, responding to the music as naturally as breathing. She could feel it in the quiet nods, the slightly widened eyes, the soft smiles, and even in the occasional tear glistening on a cheek. She had transformed the hall into a shared space of connection and understanding. Each note she played reinforced the message that music is universal, that it can convey what words often cannot. Midway through the piece, she introduced subtle variations, unexpected shifts in rhythm, and delicate harmonies that showcased her mastery. The audience reacted instinctively, leaning closer, their attention fully captured. Some whispered quietly to each other, not in criticism, but in wonder. "How is she doing that?" they seemed to ask. "She is amazing," It was clear that she had completely redefined their expectations. The young musicians, in particular, were silent, studying each movement, each touch of the keys, realizing that age and appearance were irrelevant when true passion and talent are present. She allowed herself a quiet smile as she played. It was a moment of pure joy, a culmination of years of effort and love for the piano. The music was flowing naturally now, connecting seamlessly from one passage to another. She had learned over the years that the most powerful performances were not about impressing others with speed or complexity, but about expressing sincerity and emotion. She let her heart guide her fingers, trusting the music and trusting the connection with the audience. The hall seemed to lean in, absorbing every note. There was a sense of intimacy despite the size of the audience. Each person felt personally addressed by the music, as though it were speaking directly to them. The performance was no longer just about talent. It was about human connection, about sharing feelings that were universally understood. The audience could sense the authenticity, and it was impossible to ignore. They were experiencing not just a skilled performance, but a glimpse into a life lived fully, expressed through music. As the piece reached its climax, the melody soared, filling the entire hall with sound. Her hands moved with precision, yet there was a natural flow, a beauty that came from years of practice and love. The young musicians watched in awe, learning that technical skill was important, but it was the heart and emotion behind the notes that truly made music unforgettable. The audience was captivated, completely absorbed by the intensity and beauty of the performance. There were moments of silence between notes, creating tension and expectation, only to be followed by rich, powerful chords that resonated deeply. The woman could feel the story reaching its peak. Every emotion she wanted to convey had found its place in the music. She had taken the audience on a journey, guiding them through quiet reflection, moments of tension, and bursts of joy and beauty. The connection was tangible, and she felt gratitude for the opportunity to share her passion so openly. The audience's admiration was evident, and she knew that they were experiencing something rare and special, something that would stay with them long after the music had stopped. As she began to bring the piece to a close, she played with gentle control, letting each note linger and resonate. The audience was spellbound, fully present in the moment. She allowed the final chords to fade naturally, giving the room a moment of quiet reflection. When the last note settled, there was a brief, almost reverent silence before the audience erupted into applause. The sound was overwhelming, yet sincere, a recognition of her talent, dedication, and the emotional power of her performance. People stood, cheering and clapping, some with tears in their eyes. The transformation from mockery to admiration was complete. She smiled gently, bowing slightly, a quiet acknowledgement of the audience's recognition. She had faced doubt and ridicule, but she had remained true to herself and her music. Her performance had become more than entertainment. It was a statement, a lesson, and an inspiration. The audience had witnessed the power of perseverance, passion, and the ability to defy expectations, and they responded with heartfelt appreciation. As she stepped away from the piano, she felt a sense of fulfillment unlike any other. She had shared her music, her story, and her heart with the world. The young musicians who had once doubted her were now inspired, understanding that mastery is built over time and with love. The audience had experienced a performance that would stay with them, a moment of pure human connection through art. She realized that this recognition, while gratifying, was secondary to the joy of performing and connecting with others. That was the true reward. She walked slowly off the stage, reflecting on the journey that had led her here. Years of practice, moments of doubt, and countless hours spent nurturing her talent had culminated in this moment of shared human experience. She knew that her story, told through the piano, would inspire others to follow their passions regardless of age or circumstance. The performance had transformed not only the audience's perception but also reinforced her own belief in the value of dedication, authenticity, and the power of art to move hearts and minds. The day had started with quiet anticipation and a touch of doubt, but it had ended in triumph and connection. She had proven that talent, passion, and perseverance could overcome skepticism, and that age was no barrier to creating something truly beautiful. The applause, the admiration, and the emotional response of the audience were acknowledgments of her life's work and the sincerity she had poured into her music. She had transformed mockery into admiration and created a memory that would remain long after the hall had emptied. As she left the hall, she felt a quiet sense of peace. She had shared her music in the most genuine way possible, and in doing so, she had touched lives, inspired hearts, and shown that the human spirit, combined with dedication and love, can create something timeless. The experience reaffirmed her belief that music was more than notes and rhythms. It was a bridge between people, a storyteller, and a reminder of what is possible when one follows their heart fully. After the performance, she sat quietly off to the side, taking a moment to breathe and gather her thoughts. The applause had faded, but the energy in the hall lingered, almost tangible. People were still talking, sharing their amazement, replaying in their minds the elegance and emotion of her music. Even those who had doubted her abilities at the beginning were now speaking in hushed tones about her extraordinary talent. She listened quietly, smiling softly, knowing that the impact of her performance was already spreading. The young musicians who had initially mocked her came over, their expressions a mixture of respect and disbelief. They congratulated her, some even shaking her hands, while others simply watched in awe, unsure of how to express their admiration. She accepted their gestures with gentle grace, understanding that their skepticism had transformed into learning and appreciation. It warmed her heart to see that her dedication, years of practice, and love for music had inspired not only the audience but also her peers, teaching them a lesson that words alone could not convey. As she walked through the hall after the performance, people approached her to offer kind words, compliments, and even questions about her journey. She listened patiently, responding with a humble smile. She explained that music had always been her companion, her voice, and her way of expressing herself. Many were curious about her age and how she had maintained such skill, but she simply said that it was never about age. It was about passion, dedication, and never giving up. The audience absorbed her words, realizing that her story was as inspiring as her performance. Later, outside the hall, a few attendees approached to take photographs and record short videos. She allowed it, recognizing that sharing her performance could inspire people beyond those present in the room. Social media would soon be filled with clips of her playing, and stories of her talent would travel far and wide. She did not seek fame, but she understood that her message could reach countless hearts through these recordings. The idea of spreading inspiration gave her a quiet sense of joy, knowing that her music could touch people she might never meet in person. The day continued, and she reflected on how much this performance had meant to her. Years of quiet practice, often alone in her room, had led to this moment. The skepticism, the mockery, and the doubt she had faced were now distant memories, replaced by admiration, respect, and a profound sense of fulfillment. She realized that her music had not only entertained but had connected people on a deep emotional level. It had reminded them, and herself, that passion and dedication could break barriers, and that age was never an obstacle to achieving something extraordinary. Back at home, she took time to rest and reflect on the day. The piano sat quietly in the corner, waiting for the next moment when her fingers would return to the keys. She thought about the audience's reactions, the young musicians, and the lasting impact of her performance. She felt a sense of gratitude, not for the applause, but for the opportunity to share her gift, to inspire, and to show that music could be a bridge between people, regardless of age or background. The experience reaffirmed her belief that talent, nurtured with patience and love, would always shine when given the chance. In the days that followed, her performance gained attention beyond the local community. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers praised her online, sharing clips and stories about the woman who had turned mockery into wonder. Invitations to perform at other events began to arrive, not just locally, but from other cities as well. She remained humble, choosing carefully which opportunities to accept, understanding that her joy came from sharing music, not from recognition or fame. Each invitation was a chance to reach more hearts, to continue inspiring others, and she welcomed that possibility with quiet excitement. Her story began to touch people of all ages. Young musicians were inspired to practice more diligently. Adults were reminded that passion need not diminish with age, and older individuals saw proof that their dreams were still attainable. She became a symbol of perseverance and dedication, someone whose love for music transcended age and societal expectations. Each letter, message, or comment she received reminded her that her journey had significance beyond her own life, impacting others in ways she had never imagined. She continued to practice daily, not to prove anything, but to nurture the love she had for the piano. Each note she played was a reflection of a life filled with experience, emotion, and perseverance. She experimented with new pieces, refined old favorites, and allowed herself moments of creativity and improvisation. Music was her sanctuary, her expression, and her gift to the world. Every practice session strengthened not only her skill but also her confidence and her connection to the art she loved so deeply. Over time, her story and performances became a source of inspiration for local music schools and community events. Teachers would tell their students about her dedication and passion, and aspiring musicians learned that age, doubt, or initial mockery could never diminish genuine talent. She never sought to be famous, but her story served as a living lesson in courage, perseverance, and the transformative power of following one's passion. Her journey showed that it is never too late to share your gift, and that authenticity and dedication will always resonate with others. She also found joy in mentoring young musicians who came to her with questions and curiosity. She shared her experiences, emphasizing the importance of practice, patience, and love for music. She encouraged them to express themselves fully and to never be deterred by the opinions of others. Through these interactions, she realized that her journey was not only about her own growth, but also about guiding and inspiring others. Music, she understood, was a legacy, something to be shared and passed on, connecting generations and hearts. Years of quiet dedication, moments of doubt, and countless hours of practice had culminated in a story that inspired many. She had faced ridicule and disbelief, yet she had remained committed to her passion. Through her music, she had transformed skepticism into admiration, silence into applause, and doubt into inspiration. Her journey demonstrated that life's obstacles could be overcome through persistence, passion, and authenticity. The piano had been more than an instrument. It had been a companion, a teacher, and a medium through which she could share her soul. As she continued to perform occasionally, each performance was treated as an opportunity to connect, inspire, and share her love of music. The audience's reactions, whether local or from afar through recordings, reinforced the message that it is never too late to pursue your dreams. Her story became a reminder to everyone that talent, when nurtured with dedication and passion, could emerge at any stage of life and touch countless hearts. Her age was not a limitation but a testament to the years she had devoted to perfecting her art. In the quiet moments, when she sat alone at her piano, she reflected on the journey. The mockery and doubt had been necessary in their way, for they had allowed her to demonstrate resilience and authenticity. Her music had spoken louder than words ever could, proving that passion, patience, and commitment could overcome even the harshest skepticism. She felt peace and fulfillment, knowing that she had lived her life in alignment with her passion. And in doing so, she had inspired others to embrace their own gifts without fear. The story of the 78-year-old Japanese woman who had once been mocked at a piano show and had astonished the world with her talent became a legend in her community and beyond. It was a tale not only of skill but of courage, determination, and the power of pursuing one's passion despite age or expectation. People remembered her not just for her music, but for the example she set, showing that true talent and dedication are timeless, and that inspiration can come from the most unexpected places. Her life in music served as a reminder that it is never too late to shine, to share, and to make a difference in the hearts of others.